Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we'll bring up to the stage Scott Woods, Senior Specialized Solutions Architect from AWS. We also have Brian Herbst from NASCAR, Senior Vice President of Broadcasting and Innovation. Very happy to have you, Brian. And also Marcel Hasenrader, did I get that right?
Spot on.
From Chief Executive Officer from Native Wave. So I'm really excited to be here. We've got a lot of topics to cover. And so I think we'll dive right in. I'm going to kick it off with Brian. You guys at NASCAR, you've just basically signed a brand new sponsorship deal and kind of rejiggered a little bit of how you treat sponsors. Tell us a little bit about that, what the rationale was, and what you see the vision going forward in terms of working with these rights holders to give them a platform that they pay for.
Sure. Great question. So I'd say, first of all, hi, great to be here. Brian Herbst, NASCAR. I think our old sponsorship model, and I speak to NASCAR as an industry, old sponsorship model was there's a lot of different stakeholders in the sport. There's NASCAR, that's the sanctioning body. You can be the official soft drink of NASCAR, for instance. There's Fox and NBC, our domestic rights holders. You can spend money with those guys, with Fox and NBC on TV. You can buy digital media with NASCAR Digital Media. You can buy team sponsorships. You can buy track sponsorships. And I think that worked for a while, that kind of fragmentation. You could have Coke do 5 or 6 different deals across the industry. What we found was there was probably an easier way to kind of go about that approach with brands in particular. So what we did, starting in 2020, was we essentially created a model where if you're going to be a premier partner of NASCAR, we now have 4 of them, Anheuser-Busch, Geico, Xfinity, and I'm missing one. Anyway, there's a 4th one, I promise, and it's a cool brand. If you're going to be a premier partner of NASCAR, you're going to spend across the entire ecosystem. So what we think that does is that locks in premier partners to Coca-Cola was the last one, I promise I get it. It locks in premier partners to long-term deals. It keeps them engaged on a lot of different platforms, whether it's on TV, traditional linear broadcast, or OTT products, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, tracks, teams, and they activate across the entire ecosystem, not necessarily dependent on the NASCAR portion coming off without a hitch, or the track or the teams. We think that's an easier way to activate within the industry and keep these blue chip brands on board of the sport.
And just a quick follow-up, make a commentary if you will, because I think in the last month or two, after a decade of promoting OTT and the pay TV business is dead, now we've had in the last 3 months or so, DirecTV Now has lost subscribers, changed names, et cetera. And you maybe could attribute that to mismanagement or whatever. Then you have View, it's shut down, and now you have, I don't know if you guys saw, but Sling TV had lost subscribers, right? So I'm a big bull on streaming, and I'm not exactly sure what's happening, right? I think there's a lot of confusion. What's your take? I think you guys closed recently some new broadcast deals as well, if I'm not mistaken, or was that, did you get any, or anyways, others have closed broadcast deals. I guess I gave the example of WWE where they closed a new broadcast deal, and they're doing really well on the traditional TV broadcast side. So just give me your take on that. Where are we in this changing landscape? Is this a lull? Is it the calm before the storm, or is TV better than we all thought?
So I think that sports rights in particular are holding up better than most other entertainment properties. So there's always a balance between reaching the most amount of eyeballs for us, which is still on broadcast TV. It might be some of the deals that you're referencing, right? So PGA Tour goes out to market. They still keep the level of broadcast inventory that they had in the prior cycle. It's really important for the PGA Tour to be exposed to as many eyeballs as possible versus going to cable or OTT. So some of those traditional legacy media companies are still winning the rights bids that are coming up even in their most recent cycle. For us, about half of our race inventory, and that's Cup, Xfinity, and trucks, if you're familiar with NASCAR, about half of that race inventory is on broadcast TV, so that's big Fox and NBC, and half of that inventory is on the cable networks, Fox Sports 1 and NBC Sports Network are our partners. It is a balance between maximizing the financials of any deal that we're going to do. So if we push all of our races to cable, there's more valuable NASCAR content that FS1 and NBC Sports Network can use to hammer the DirecTVs of the world and Xfinities of the world on the head for larger carriage rate increases, things like that. However, we also know that there's a 45% drop in viewership when we go from a broadcast race to a cable race. So as a property, it's something we think a lot about because we'd like to have maximized eyeballs, but there's also a financial expectation as well, and it's something that, especially if you're looking at the pay TV environment eroding 3-4% per year. There's a lot of questions about that, certainly in 2020 and 2019.
Very good. And I think regardless of whether or not OTT is that threat that has pushed, all these television providers to evolve and innovate, I think that is the upside, is that they are innovating quite a bit, all of them, including Amazon and its various elements. Prime Video is doing interesting things. Obviously the Thursday Night Football. Scott, I thought you had a really great take on innovation. You've been working in the legacy media space, if you could say it like that, for many, many years, and sort of pushing all these players to innovate. It must be fun. Tell us a little bit about what you see in the realm of innovation and how the cloud is enabling all the innovation that you're seeing today, and how customers are reacting and using. Tell us that story.
Sure, absolutely. So again, Scott Wood, Solutions Architect, AWS. I've been in this business about 20 years, and to see the evolution, it's been pretty incredible. I started off kind of in the IT, moved to broadcast, and then now back into, cloud services. And I think one of the big things that cloud offers is the ability for customers to be agile, right? And to be elastic, to be able to, with a credit card, to be able to go in and start spinning up resources and start innovating and doing things that they traditionally took months and years to do, they can now do within weeks, right? So all these resources are at their fingertips. So when people start having ideas like, hey, we would like to try this, whether it's closed captionings or different workflows that we're seeing with artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? To take advantage of resources that they originally didn't have access to, right? Now it's at their fingertips. They can spin up and try things within minutes. It's pretty incredible to see when you start explaining what's available to people in the cloud, how the light bulbs go off, right? And they see what's available and they start thinking, hey, we can do this, and we don't have to go out and spend millions of dollars to invest in infrastructure to be able to just test out a theory, like an idea. It's been pretty amazing.
And so, you were speaking specifically when we prepped up about the car telemetry. And all of these sort of IoT devices. Just describe in a little more depth, what's the challenge there? How many of these devices and what kinds of speeds and latencies? Let's get a little bit nerdy about it, right? I mean, I think it's interesting.
Yes.
It takes a lot of effort to pull these things together, and people kind of take it for granted. But talk to us about the challenge.
Sure, absolutely. So a great use case for this that we've talked about publicly is Formula One. Right? They have 120 different telemetry sensors in their cars, and they're streaming 3 gigs per second from every car into the cloud using Kinesis. And they basically created this what's called a content lake. The idea of bringing all your data together, and the cloud really enables that. It allows you to bring these different sources in, then run analysis on that using different tools that are available. And then to be able to leverage that data along with their content, whether it's VOD or live streaming, and to create a better user experience, right? To bring in social media data. All that is available, and to date, they've been on disparate systems. The cloud really enables that, and it enables it at scale. And so we see that with Major League Baseball, with StatCast, the NFL. I mean, you see these commercials that run during the Super Bowl, if you're watching the Super Bowl. The things that these sports organizations are doing, and NASCAR is a perfect example. We're working with NASCAR as well, to take that rich data, and many have had for decades, that has not been used customer-facing, and start putting that towards the customer and creating that rich experience. I think that's one of the reasons that you're seeing all these brands go digital and go direct to their consumer, which I think is also impacting, like Sling TV and others. Customers are going directly to the content they want and slowly pulling back from this a la carte, or all the channels available, because we only watch 4 or 5. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So your take on the OTT being that it might be the aggregator model there, not necessarily the stream. I mean, I guess streaming is a very popular. It's a very kind of freedom feeling type of thing. You're on your phone, et cetera.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting observation. And Marcel, let's move to you on the innovation side. One of the best cases of innovation that I have seen, which was an attempted innovation, I'm going to try to be delicate about this, but last year at the NBA All-Star Game, this is last year, Twitter did something very innovative. They had a second screen feed. Do you guys remember this? You voted for the player you were going to watch, and you were going to watch that ISO feed on a second screen while you're on the TV. Being the TV geek that I am, I, of course, was there ready with my phone. And here's what I found. Twitter had gotten the latency down to about 10 seconds, right? But it wasn't enough. Even 4 or 5 seconds off of that screen was just it was confusing, it was hard. It wasn't even a bad experience. It was literally unwatchable. I mean that in the best possible way. Like, I think Twitter's awesome. It's a great feed. NBA's
just unwatchable.
Yes, exactly. That's all. But I say it too because I heard somebody on the last panel, actually a friend of mine, Abby, was like, oh, the technology's here, it's here, it's here. And in many cases it is, but actually it's still kind of not quite here. Marcel, that is probably one of the longest tee-ups I've ever done about your synchronized screen thing, which is really cool, right? And you don't have a demo, but like you explain what it is. You put up your scene. Yeah, go ahead.
So out of that, I mean, we identified pretty early the gap between linear broadcast, linear experience, and the OTT experience. That's a clear thing. So it's technological. That's the 30, 40, 50-second delay on OTT. And our guys were wondering, why does that exist? Because there's technology in place that's been there for years and no one's using it. So that we identified that gap. Now, if you're just increasing the speed of the same picture, great. Okay, you're delivering the same content. But we saw an opportunity exactly there for that enhancement of linear broadcast, a normal broadcast or your main feed to that classic second screen, but bringing it actually in time and delivering the OTT side faster than the linear side,
right,
and synchronizing it, which makes a much more compelling thing. I mean, motor racing we've been involved with already. One driver pitted against the other. You've got a backward shooting camera on one. You're watching the other angle. It sort of brings a lot more engagement into it, and it gives that flexibility of viewing that a lot of people are really wondering why it's not there.
And I'll make a deeper point on this, which I think it's a really important one. I'm a big fan of like time-shifted viewing and things like that. So if you're watching a baseball game, maybe there's a video assist going on, something's going on, and you can see diving into your phone to watch your version of the replay, right? And in baseball, for example, that works really well. Not so in moto. In racing, in motorsports of any kind, really, right? If you want to go into that second view, it has to be synced so that you have the TV synced with your second, and your technology does that, right? It's basically listening to the feed audio-wise.
So you need some source of truth to synchronize. So what we use mainly, we have other methods too, but is the audio. So we basically listen. You don't need a direct connection with your TV. You don't need a direct connection with your device that you're watching your primary feed on. It simply listens. And we utilize, and getting to the cloud thing, I mean, it's extremely important for us. We use the cloud to enable all of that to happen. So we have our secret sauce in the cloud doing that synchronization stuff, which is very difficult, and treating video and audio as data as it is, and being able to coordinate all that to make it available at any time, even if there's a time shift. So, we use a lot of AWS services because it enables us to have that scalability that we look for. If we're looking at cricket in India now, big thing. You can go from 500,000 viewers to 12 million in 5 minutes. So we need that scalability, but in the cloud it enables you to do that. So we're a pretty small company, but we're able to utilize all that scalability to deliver something to big broadcasters, to big leagues, enhancing what they do best, basically.
Very good. And Brian, over to you, talking about these different experiences, interactive experiences, cameras in the car. Tell us a little bit, or teach us a little bit about how you split those rights up and how you think about that. Oh, these partners are going to get those in-camera feeds. These aren't. How do you calculate who gets it, who doesn't, and how do you kind of roll these things out over the platforms?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of it is predicated by demand, right? So we wouldn't necessarily, we have 8 in-car camera feeds for a race like the Daytona 500. This weekend, we'd have somewhere between 30 or 40 cameras at the event. If we're going to distribute our rights to Australia, right, we probably don't need 8 in-car camera feeds and the linear broadcast going to Australia. The demand isn't there for that much content. But in the U.S., there is. So the U.S. market, where about 90% of our global viewership resides, will have in-car camera feeds. 8 in-cars are equipped with in-car cameras. Again, camera at the front, camera at the back, and the sides. You'll have 8 in-car camera feeds per race. Those in-car camera feeds are available on both NASCAR digital platforms, so NASCAR.com, NASCAR Mobile, et cetera. They're also available to the broadcast partner, whoever the linear broadcast partner is, so Fox Sports, NBC, et cetera. And then the broadcasters specifically, Fox and NBC in the U.S., they have exclusivity around the live event itself. So the full linear broadcast is exclusively available on Fox or NBC digital platforms in addition to linear.
Excellent. And I guess just to extend that a little bit, you do have other rights that you kind of play a little more freely with. Tell me a little bit about that. I think you mentioned that Bob Francis, right, is the family that owns some of these other IMSA rights, and that it gives you a little more freedom, and how that opens up the thoughts around innovation.
Yeah, great question. So Jim France runs NASCAR, the France family. So the Francis control NASCAR. They also control a sports car series called IMSA. So if you saw Ford versus Ferrari, great movie, by the way, it ends at Le Mans, but the race that happens in Daytona, the 24 hours of Daytona, that's IMSA, that's sports cars. As you can imagine, a pretty different demo for an IMSA sports car fan versus a NASCAR fan. And then Jim France, also, again, chairman and CEO of NASCAR, he also owns a motorcycle property called American Flat Track. So that's a younger demo, pretty blue collar. So you have 3 different demos all within kind of the NASCAR France family. What we've done on the OTT side is we've aggregated all of that content into one place called Track Pass. We partner with NBC Sports Gold, who's the rights holder, and we distribute about 500 live events, 1,000 hours of content, all events that typically were undercovered or not covered all on linear TV. So there's not much that we can do that are already tied up with a Fox and NBC kind of TV deal, but what we can do is elevate these other properties that historically haven't been covered on linear TV with OTT platforms specifically.
And is it fair to say that those are also places for experimentation, a little more experimentation around, for example, betting? If that's I'm not sure if that's an area, but are there things that you're doing at those other properties that strike out in your head as like, oh yeah, that's a perfect time to try that?
Yeah, I think experimentation is a great way to look at it. It could be experimentation in terms of the consumer-facing experience. Is it in-race bet types? Is it polls? Is it things like that? I think that's one way to experiment. We can experiment from a production perspective. So do you need the high-end $200,000 per event production, which is what we have with Fox and NBC, or is there a way to slim that down to $5,000 and $10,000 and just have a few cameras and a pit road reporter to make sure that the economics work on the OTT side as well? And then there's also experimentation in terms of product type and content that we offer. So what tracks perform well, what series perform well. I'll give you a quick story that Dan Barker, who runs our OTT platform, and I were dealing with earlier. So we get done with the Daytona 500 on Monday night, scary situation. Everything is great, and with Ryan and the crash for those of you guys who saw that. But we put out TV ratings. We understand, how well that race performed, and it was 5-year highs on Sunday, which is positive. And then you get back to your day job. Today's day job was a fan complaining that we didn't have super late model qualifiers, practice, and race sessions on our OTT product. Does anybody in this room, have they ever heard of super late models? One person. Okay, that's great. You're the one person on Twitter that's angry at us. So, oh, there you go. So there's the users that we have to cater to with a big Fox linear broadcast, 30, 40 cameras per event, $500,000 worth of production that goes into that on Sunday during the Daytona 500. And then there's the 5,000 people that are going to watch super late models if we put it on, which we're not today, on Track Pass. And finding a way to understand the economics of that and also speak to each fan individually is one that we have to balance.
Excellent. I guess I'll move to you on the question of economics. I mean, to me, it's an opportunity with AWS here. I mean, it is one of the most innovative companies. I make a joke about it because I hear people. I heard a guy from AWS, actually a senior marketing guy. And this was just after NAB, and he's like, well, we have what we call a shock and awe strategy. You've probably heard this. I was like, yeah, I was a victim of that shock and awe strategy because I'm a guy who's been in the video and TV tech vendor space. And I mean, pretty much every idea that you can throw out there, it's like, oh, it's a few years down the road, and what's the business case, and what's the business model? And you wake up nowadays, and like, it's Amazon. They're already on top of it, whether it's edge computing or sidewalk or some of this kinesis stuff that you're talking about. Tell us how you're approaching the market. You said something interesting in the hallway about you are actually trying to power partnerships. You are not trying to create a dominance in every last sector of the space, right? I'm giving you an opportunity to right that wrong misconception that I had. But tell us a little bit about those relationships you have with customers, how you're empowering them and their teams to do innovation.
So I have a question. How many people have that same opinion, that Amazon's taking over, or AWS is taking over the world? Okay, so it's just you I need to convince.
Okay,
All right,
yeah.
very good. How many
In a
AWS
good
customers?
way, in a good way.
How many AWS customers in the room?
Right.
Fantastic. Yeah, no. So, you know, it's interesting. You know, again, we've seen, you know, broadcasters and people delivering video kind of shy away from the cloud initially, right? We can't get hands on it. We can't touch it. You know, our guys know, you know, and then you start expanding that to how do we reach customers globally? How do we expand? How do we rapidly innovate? And when you share with them what's available, right? Whether it's just cloud resources like compute, right? You can build your own applications. You can run them on AWS, and you can do so globally, right? 20 plus regions across the world. It's just amazing, the breadth and depth of all the services that we have available to allow customers to use those services to innovate and then go to market at a global scale, right? Try something out. As you mentioned, streaming, right? 5,000 people watching an OT stream. It doesn't make economic sense to do so. But you can certainly try it, and if it doesn't work out, simply shut it down. And you've not invested a tremendous amount of resources into it. So I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people with new ideas in the media space really embracing this idea of, I don't have to put a lot of upfront capital expense in, and I can use operating expense. I can fire something up, see if it works. And, you know, I had an experience. I was working with a broadcaster, Graham Digital, if you're familiar with them. They have several television stations across the country. And this was in Orlando, and they do fireworks over the fountain every 4th of July. And so they wanted to create a digital experience, right? They have their whole broadcast experience where they set up a stage and they roll out equipment, they put up cameras. But they wanted to create a unique digital experience for their consumers. But they didn't want to, you know, put a lot of time, or they put time in, but they didn't put a lot of capital expense. They wanted to run the entire thing in the cloud. So people with cell phones out talking to people around the lake during the fireworks experience. We also had cameras that were coming, you know, from their broadcast offices that they were pulling back. So I had a Skycam, which was really cool because I got to help direct. I actually involved because I love production. But we brought all these camera feeds. I mean, we had over 10, I think there were 12, 15 different camera feeds, all coming into the cloud. We were able to switch those in the cloud, put graphic overlays, do an entire production for 10 hours without having any physical equipment to do so. And so those are the innovative things that they can start doing. You know, if you've got a situation, you know, where their entire station goes offline, they can actually reach their customers, you know, just using cloud resources. So anyway, we give them that tool to innovate and see what they can do.
And I applaud, by the way, this is not a market power kind of comment. Like, I applaud the level of innovation. It really is amazing. I'm using AWS all the time and spinning up interesting things that to me are like, well, 5 years ago that might have been a $1 million bill or what have you. So I think it's a great thing all the way around. Let's put up those questions if we can, sort of get that rolling, and remind you guys to ask some questions. And I'll kick it to you in the interim here, Brian, to talk a little bit more about the rights relationships and specifically about the ongoing conversations you have, right? And I think you mentioned that you do have these periods of renegotiation where these deals come up. Opportunities come up for particular activations. How does that work? Walk us through kind of a behind the scenes with the rights holders and the channels on how you orchestrate that.
Sure. Great question. So our latest media deal went live with Fox and NBC. It went live in 2015, runs through 2024. But those rights were negotiated in 2012 and 2013. You can imagine what the digital rights component of a piece of paper that looks like when we drafted it in 2012, 2013 looks like. There's a lot of items that we're, quote, silent on, so don't contemplate social media opportunities, don't contemplate certainly VR, AR, And what we've done, first you argue about it. You argue about it for a while, over 120 pages of paper and legal documents, and lawyers get paid really well. And then once you kind of build trust with each one of those partners, in our case, Fox and NBC, we just discuss kind of what's right for the sport. How do we grow the sport together? Are there revenue opportunities for each side? But we've actually had 5 different amendments to the digital rights agreements with Fox in the last 5 years. So every single year we're sitting down with Fox and we're saying, hey, in-car streaming, for instance, on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, that's not something that either one of us contemplated when we signed a rights deal in 2012. But clearly that's an opportunity to access a younger demo than we would otherwise have access to on Fox Sports 1 or NBC Sports Network. We think it's important to be in front of that demo. Let's figure out what the revenue split should be and do what's right for the sports. We try to not let a rights agreement get in the way of common sense or driving the sport forward.
Excellent. Marcel, does this impact your business at all? Are you talking with folks like, oh, that's really cool, but I don't know if I have rights to do it?
Yeah, obviously that's a hurdle, and that's part of the gap that I was mentioning earlier. And the gap is a historical one, because people couldn't foresee these things. So the OTT rights were maybe not that interesting, and they were secured by another company. So to do innovative things of a real second screen experience that we were able to deliver, maybe the rights aren't there anymore. And so, you see a movement of consolidation. You see with AT&T, their involvement now in more broadcasting. You see the same things happening globally, that there are players consolidating because they may say, well, we can cross-pollinate a lot of our business units, help all of those sort of things. So it becomes a more compelling story to see the whole picture. Where we are seeing a lot of interest is because of maybe part of the cost thing that's getting reduced through the cloud. If you've got 30 cameras in an event, you're setting them up anyway. So what's the extra cost of maybe putting them out, making them available if they're automated in some way, there's some meaningful content? Actually, that actually helps to maybe broaden those rights a little bit further out to offer even more if the broadcaster wants them.
Very good. We'll throw up those questions again, and this one. So I'm going to take us through a couple of lightning round questions, and the first one will just be the most interesting thing happening in sports in the next couple of years, and so that's exactly. I'll give you guys maybe some time to think about that. Obviously, sports betting. So I'm going to pick sports betting as one of them. Do you guys have any of you have something that is in top of your mind as like the most important thing in the next few years, whether it's sports betting, 4K, HDR, any big topic? I know I'm putting you guys on the spot here, but anything that really excites you about the sports business in 2020, 2021?
Being Australian and seeing what's happening here with the betting stuff that's suddenly opening up to legal betting, I think that's a huge opportunity, done in the right way and tastefully. I think, while not interfering, maybe you don't want to interfere with the main broadcast, maybe supplementary offerings help enable that a little bit, get more engagement from the people who are probably betting anyway on this sort of stuff. I think that will in itself gauge or increase a lot of interest in the whole betting thing.
Top question here: how does NASCAR handle their production? Oh, sorry, is production and post-production happening in the cloud as well? Do you know that, Brian? Or probably
so,
part of it, right?
as you can tell by my lack of terminology like kinesis and content lake, I'm probably not the right person to speak to this. But at a high level, we have an in-house production group of probably 100 people based in Charlotte, North Carolina. We distribute from a international perspective. We develop a world feed in Charlotte, and then we distribute it to 185 countries and territories. Around the specifics in terms of what vendors and technology we use, I probably have to have people smarter than myself.
Actually, why don't I tee it up for you though? You do have a deal with AWS.
We do. So Amazon is a official partner of NASCAR. The deal that we worked on with Amazon last year is NASCAR is about 70 years and 500,000 hours of content that we have archived back in Charlotte. It was a pretty manual process. We've taken that 500,000 hours into the cloud with the help of AWS, and there's tagging and automatic recognition. You think about the race that you saw on Monday night, and you have 3 cars that are coming across the finish line: Ryan Newman in the 6 car, and Ryan Blaney in the 12 car, and Denny Hamlin, who won the race in the 11 car. There's a number, there's a team, there's a driver, there's a sponsor, there's a track. We can go on and on, but the branding around our sport, there's value to that as well. So on Tuesday, when FedEx calls and they want footage of the win from Denny Hamlin, all of that will be automated, and rather than a logger handling that in Charlotte, we can automatically do that with Amazon.
Excellent. I see another question. X-ray style integrations. I think we've talked about a few of these. Do you guys have more or any additional comments on additional content that you might put into this sort of like additional feed? I think there was a great comment that I think Zach Leontis made on one of those other panels about this idea of like you have one feed, but there are 10 versions now that in digital you can spin out. I think you probably have done some of this X-ray style stuff with the car cams, yes?
We have the X-ray technology, at least specific to Amazon. Most of that's handled through original programming and documentaries that we've done with Prime and the Amazon guys. In terms of the live environment, that hasn't come up as recently. It's just kind of a standard manual graphic that we insert or lower third to know here's the car, here's the number, but it hasn't been automated yet. Certainly something we could look at in the future.
And I guess I can't really leave this discussion without talking about low latency and whether that's your spoiler use case where you don't want to be spoiled by social media or an MDU, an apartment building, if you will. I think you're probably closest to answer that question. I think closest to me. But I mean, you did purchase SAW. You purchased an entity, a set of assets, right? That are low latency streaming enabled.
Sure.
And
yes.
you've got customers pushing you for sports betting reasons and things like that to move to low latency.
Yeah, I joke, but yes. So everyone wants to get low latency, right? They 20, 30, 40 seconds of latency, for something that's not live is fine, right? No one really cares. But when it comes to live sports and live events, they want as low latency as possible. And so there's been a lot of improvements in that without getting into like WebRTC and technologies like that, which are more conference call type technologies, but really broadcast. And I think the streaming industry in general, with Apple releasing a low latency HLS, and that's going through its hurdles, and Dash, people using Dash and CMAF technologies to really cut down the latency of live streaming. I think end of this year into next year, we're going to see definite improvements in that. Now, you asked a question earlier, and I'm going to back to that to include in here. When you start creating unique user experiences, right? So you start analyzing data and you start analyzing video to provide a richer user experience. That takes time and certainly adds delay. I think we're going to see improvements in that as well. So hopefully, not only can we just do low latency, for gambling applications or whatever, right? And to make sure that all our viewers are seeing things in sync, but we need to address, targeted advertising. If this user is connecting, how am I going to target that user? And if the latency for video is that low, how are you going to be able to get there with graphics, with personalized ad insertion, and other metadata technologies, and things like Kinesis to be able to handle high-speed data and to be able to process that? I think bringing all that together does take time, but we're seeing the latency improve significantly. So I'm excited about the future of gaming. Or not, I say I'm not a gamer. I'm old enough not to be a gamer. But I think generations coming are going to want to experience sports, right? Live sports in the way they're kind of experiencing esports today. And I think that's really the direction I see even the broadcast, more the digital experience, but I think broadcast could be improved as well.
And Marcel, quickly to you, talking about synchronization and advertising that you just mentioned into that overlay, right? That stuff you're looking at, and you're seeing clients that demand that type of interactions?
Well, indeed. One of the points is that because of that, because if someone's choosing a particular view of something, you can probably categorize them in a different way. If they're, I don't know, they're riding in the Ford or the Chevy or the Kawasaki motorcycle, they're watching that. They're a fan of that rider, that driver. They might be from this particular country. Their interests are probably going to be this. They're in this age bracket. You can start targeting stuff specifically to them within that app without interfering with the main broadcast. So you can be very biased to the Ford fan, right? But you don't have to be biased on the main feed. And that sort of starts to have that personalization experience, adding to all that sort of stuff that's happening in the background. Now, in itself, that's not innovative, but increasing the real estate, I think, is really important. And being able to synchronize the data is something we work very hard on to make sure that is actually synchronized with the audio. And I think audio is also an area that's starting to get changed a little bit with multiple audios that need to be synced in. So you've got your shoutcast, you've got your manic fans who are fantastically talented people who can talk for 12 hours straight without without even breathing, and integrating those people maybe as the preferred commentators.
Yep.
I think that's the experience that these gamers are waiting for.
All right, Brian, one last question. I'm going to put you on the spot. You have an additional, let's call it $1 million, and you got to spend it on one of three things. One, you're going to use cloud production to lower your costs so you can get that feed going, the one that only 5,000 people are going to watch. Two, you're going to go 4K UHD all in. I don't know if it cost $1 million, but let's just call it. And three, you're going to dive deeper into betting. It'll be gamification. I don't know what it is. Like, forget about the legal things, but if you had to bet on one of those three things, lowering the cost of production to cover the long tail, sports betting, or 4K UHD. I am really sorry for springing that on you, but go ahead.
Can't just take it myself or spend it on marketing on Spotify or whatever, those three things. Okay, so I'd say I would have a bias towards covering more live events to understand what content types work and what do not. That's probably where my lean would be. I think it's still very early days from a gaming perspective, especially mobile gaming, betting, to experiment too much there. So I think that whether it's a aggregated data feed company like a Genius, who's our partner in the betting space, or Sport Radar, or licensed sports books, or state jurisdictions opening up, I think they're still trying to sort that out. So if you're asking to spend $1 million in 2020, more events, more experimentation, let's see what works, and then to the extent some of those do and they rise to the top, then we can invest more and more in those.
Awesome. And how about a big round of thanks for these great panelists? Thank you all very much.